A Place Called Home by Laurie Wick. Chapter 12. Sunday dawned, warm and lovely, but the beauty of the day was lost on Christine. Staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror which hung on the inside of her closet door, her thoughts were more suited to rain. The dress she wore was mint green, lightweight and fresh-looking, with short puffed sleeves, a fitted bodice, and a full skirt. The dress was really quite lovely, and looked as though it had been made for her. A frown clouded her face as she remembered it hadn't been. Continuing to frown into the mirror, she realized how important it had become that Grandma M's family and friends like her. Being out of her element and dependent upon other people brought a rush of insecurity to Christine. As Christine descended the stairs, she decided to relax and be herself. Her lack of close friends in Spooner had been because of where she lived, not because people didn't like her. Joseph Bennet's neighbors had been elderly, which probably explained why Christine had grown close to Grandma M so quickly. Being busy helped Christine get her mind off her troubles, so with a determined step, she headed to the kitchen to start breakfast. Turning from her work, she heard Grandma M's footsteps approach. "Good morning, Christine." "Oh, you look lovely, and your hair up like that is darling." "Thank you." Christine's raised hand to her hair showed Grandma M how unsure she had been. "Oh, Christine, there's going to be 3 of us for breakfast. Silas and Luke always take care of the stock on Sundays and then take us to church." Christine noted that Grandma M talked to her as though she had been part of the family for years. Emily headed off in the direction of the dining room, counting aloud the number of family expected for lunch. Christine continued with breakfast preparations when the door leading to the backyard burst open. In strode a man, who without a glance in Christine's direction went to the washstand. Christine stood still, her eyes taking in dark hair and a full, dark beard. His shirt tightened across a broad back and muscular arms as he reached for the soap. His height made him a Cameron. As he washed, and without looking up, he began to speak in an exasperated voice. "Gram, those pigs are a nuisance. How you stand it is beyond me. And that goat! I was ready to nail his mouth shut this morning. Plus, I made the mistake of going out to the pigs before giving corn to the chickens. They followed me and kept up a steady stream of chatter the whole time I was wading in to feed those 2 monstrosities you call pigs." Silas Cameron turned from his washing to see he was not addressing his grandmother. He did not know this woman who stared at him as if he had lost his mind, but he was warm to his subject, so he continued. With little more than a flicker of surprise showing in his deep blue eyes that must be a Cameron trait, Christine thought, he went on. "Have you seen those pigs?" he asked her directly. "Belle and Betsy? Right. Well, I'll tell you, this family could be eating ham and bacon for years if she'd let us butcher those 2. Everyone tried to tell her when she and Grandpa bought this place, but no. She said she felt sorry for the animals, and Grandpa could never tell her no. So here we are. How many years later? Still taking care of—" He stopped when he saw his grandmother standing in the doorway, an amused smile playing across her lips. Silas was always much quieter than his brothers and sister. He was not one you interrupted, for fear of shutting him up, never to know when he would start again. Emily now openly smiled at her grandson. Silas returned the smile as he moved over to bend and kiss her cheek. Straightening, he leveled a look at Christine. "Gram introduced me to this poor girl who was forced to stand here and listen to me rant and rave." After the introduction, and while he was still warm to the subject, Silas shot another question at Christine. "What do you think of Belle and Betsy?" "Well, they do grow on you." Christine watched him throw back his head and roar with laughter, giving her a glimpse of beautiful white teeth amid his bearded face. His eyes were still sparkling with mirth when he said, "Grow is something Belle and Betsy do very well." This brought laughter from both Grandma M and Christine as they laid out breakfast. While they ate, Emily couldn't help but notice how relaxed Silas was with Christine. Since he was normally quiet around people he didn't know well, she couldn't help but wonder if he was drawn to her because of her resemblance to Julia, or if he was attracted to her as a woman. She was lovely and sweet. Grandma Em ate her breakfast with a thoughtful heart. Later, as Silas helped Christine into the seat of the sturdy, two-seated wagon, she sighed with relief. If the rest of the family was this nice, everything would be just fine. The drive to church was short, almost too short for Christine to become nervous. Almost, but not quite. Her palms felt damp, and she hid them in the folds of her skirt, but the sight of the church interrupted her thoughts. It was white and small and utterly charming. Christine's eyes traveled skyward, taking in the high steeple. The bell caught the morning sunshine, Christine noticed, just as it began to ring. She loved the sound. Grandma Em's hand on her arm brought her out of her daze, and they walked up the steps together. Grandma Em, sensing a need in Christine, closely hooked her arm in Christine's and led them to a seat. With a simple but warm interior, the oak pews boasted a dark stain, as did the pulpit. Off to one side sat a piano that had seen better days. Unaware of the curious glances in her direction, Christine's eyes moved around the room. A tall, lovely young woman stood out like a Christmas tree on the 4th of July in a small town like Baxter. Christine watched as a man stepped into the pulpit. Emily leaned over and told Christine his name was Pastor Nolan. Christine listened closely as Pastor Nolan made a few announcements before opening his Bible. She watched Grandma Em do the same with a Bible she hadn't even noticed. Christine's cheeks burned. She had no Bible. Without even looking at Christine, Grandma Em reached into the back of the rack and the pew in front, took out a Bible, and handed it calmly to Christine. It took Christine a little time to find Luke chapter 15, verse 11, and once she did, she didn't look at her Bible again. Her eyes riveted on Pastor Nolan, listening intently to every word. Pastor Nolan was telling a story of a young man who wanted his inheritance early. His father gave it to him. The young man left home and spent every dime, wasting it away on riotous living. When the young man found himself alone and destitute, and knew his father's servants lived better than he did, he picked himself up and started home. The father had been watching for his son and saw him when he was still down the road. The father ran and hugged his son, his heart alive with joy. They celebrated his homecoming and welcomed him with open arms. At the end of the sermon, Pastor Nolan said, "Maybe one of you has been away from home. The Lord Jesus Christ is watching and waiting to welcome you back. Maybe you aren't sure you even have a home. Maybe you haven't taken that step of faith and told him of your sin and believed he died for you." Christine stood for the closing song on wobbly legs, not understanding everything he said, but knowing the part about home was making her depressed and teary. She mentally shook herself lest she cry right there in church. Moving through church, Grandma Em took Christine with her, introducing her and staying close. Christine was unaware of how conscious Grandma Em was of her feelings. Grandma Em had glanced up at one point to find Mark and Suzanne's eyes on Christine. She watched them exchange a glance, and Grandma Em's heart felt heavy for Christine. Emily still knew next to nothing about her, but she knew that when Christine was ready to talk, she would be ready to listen. In the wagon ride home, Christine tried to sort out the people she had met. The sermon, along with all the new faces, had been a bit overwhelming. Plus, she still had not met Julia and her family. Upon arriving, Christine went straight to the kitchen, hoping the work would take her mind off of her jumbled emotions.